Good morning, Title I coordinators. I'm Tara Rodriguez, Director of the Division of School and Program Improvement at the Kentucky Department of Education. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us this morning. And we have two other presenters with us this morning.
Hello, this is David Melanti. I'm the Assistant Director in the Division of School and Program Improvement.
Good morning. I'm Brenda Considine. I'm the Title I Branch Manager.
Thanks again for everyone for joining us this morning. So we'll go ahead and get started with the logistics of this morning's call. Again, if you have a question or a comment that you would like to share during the call, you can put that in the chat box if you would like. You can also send an email to me at the address that is on the screen. Brenda, can you see the screen okay?
Sure can.
Okay, great. All right. And then, as always, if you're ever unable to join us on the live webinar, you can always watch it at your convenience. The webinars are recorded and posted on the Title I Documents and Resources page. It usually takes a couple of days for us to get them there, but you will find webinars from previous months as well. Last month, we talked about parent and family engagement requirements. We also discussed some of the common findings in monitoring in parent and family engagement, and we shared some resources with you as well. This month, Brenda and David will be talking about changes to the fiscal year 22 GMAP application. There may be some updates on equitable services. We will provide some updates on CARES Act and ESSER funds monitoring, and we will share with you some time and effort information. So let's go ahead and get started with our first agenda item, which are the changes to the GMAP application for this year.
Okay, Tara, thanks. When making changes to GMAP, we are always looking to have additional information that can be provided by the district. And in the first section for district requirements, those 4 questions that we have had in the application have always been required. And so this morning I thought we would go over those 4 questions because those narratives that districts provide to answer these district requirements are very helpful to the consultants who approve the application. And also it is very helpful in the monitoring process. It provides us evidence. So the first section that we're going to review, because you are doing this every year, is how your plan is developed and the timely and meaningful consultation that you have with teachers, principals, and other school leaders, paraprofessionals, and instructional support personnel, as well as administrators, including administrators of programs that are also included within this section, and school personnel, and with parents of children in the schools. So when we ask districts to provide this narrative, this lets us know of your process for getting your stakeholder feedback. So this section is very important. Of course, it is required for you to complete it. So that's question number 1. So Tara, let's go to question number 2. This is also required, and this is just a review of what we've had in the application in the past. The plan is also required to be coordinated with other programs. You may coordinate with IDEA. You may coordinate with the Perkins Grant for CTE, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. You may also collaborate with Head Start, the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, and anything else that you would use Title I to collaborate with, you would want to include that in this section of the district requirement narrative. The third one that we're reviewing is how you're going to implement strategies to facilitate effective transitions within your district. And those would include preschool to kindergarten, middle school to high school to post-secondary education. And this is also included in the district checklist and school checklist when we are doing monitoring. So in order for us to get additional information from the district, we would like to see how you coordinate with other institutions of higher education and employers for your high school students, and how you increase that student access to early college through dual credit or concurrent enrollment opportunities, and how you're having career counseling to identify student interests and skills. So this section is also required currently. And the last section that is required is how the district's going to support efforts to reduce the overuse of discipline practices that keep students in the classroom instead of being removed. And this might include identifying and supporting, schools that have high rates of discipline and students that are targeted through a particular gap group. So we always want to know how you're reducing your discipline practices so that students are not being removed and are able to stay in the classroom. And this is also an area that we monitor at the district and school level.
So Brenda, let me interrupt real quick just to recap a little bit for because I think we still had some folks who are still joining so let's just recap real quick. These 4 questions are already on GMAP. There's been no changes to these. This was just a review. And second, they are required in the plan, and we provided the citations for those so that people could go and see in ESSER if they wish to.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times districts and schools kind of forget that these are ESSER requirements, and therefore it has to be included in our application process. And it does tie in with monitoring. If you've participated in monitoring, you know that we're going to ask additional questions that revolve around these 4 required questions or descriptions that are provided in GMAP. So new this year that will be added to FY22. We participated last summer in a USED monitoring process. And with that process, we determined that there were some areas that we could include or enhance in our future GMAP applications. Now, the additional added sections to the district requirements for the FY22 year are not going to be, they're going to be required if your district is going to participate or if it's applicable to your district. And I think you'll see as we go through. So after the 4 district requirements, we will add number 5. And this one is, if applicable, if you're going to coordinate and integrate services for early childhood education programs at either the district level or the individual school level. And so what that is essentially saying is if you're going to serve preschool in your district or at an individual school level, you would be included to or required to add this section and provide some narrative. And in that plan that you're going to describe how you're going to provide services to the preschool, you're going to also include the transition from preschool to your local elementary school program. David, do you have anything you want to add to this section?
No, Brenda, not on that one.
Okay. So let me just kind of recap. If you provide funding to preschool, either at the district or school level, you will complete this narrative. Number 6 is going to be determined if you're going to provide at the district level support programs through your academic, career, and technical education. And you might do that through coordinated instructional strategies that would incorporate experiential learning opportunities and promote skills attainment. And these are important to those in-demand occupations or industries within our state. You would also complete this narrative if you're going to do some work-based learning opportunities that provides students an in-depth interaction with industry professionals, and if appropriate, if you're going to provide academic credit. So if the district is going to be including Title I funding for these activities, you would also need to complete this narrative.
Brenda, we got in a question, and the person asks, do we know when the consolidated plan will open in GMAP and when it will be due? I think that's a question lots of people are probably having right now.
Yes, I think so. And David, I don't think we have a determined date as of yet.
We do not at this point.
So we're still working on the FY22 to upload. So any questions or comments, David, on this section for your local schools?
No, not for number 6.
Okay. Let's look at number 7. If applicable, you're going to provide any additional information about how the district will propose to use funds so that the LEA will determine to assist schools in identifying and serving gifted and talented students. So we do know that gifted and talented students are provided in the Title I regulations and how those could be served or identified with the use of Title I funds. And also for this section, if schools are going to use Title I funding to develop your school library program, and with that, that would include developing those activities for digital literacy skills and to improve academic achievement. So also, if you're going to use Title I funding for identifying and servicing GT students or to improve your school media programs, then you would also complete this narrative. David, do you have any follow-up for this one?
Yeah, I do want to speak just briefly about gifted and talented students. I think for this particular item, if funds are going to be used for gifted and talented programs, districts have to keep in mind that the intent of Title I Part A is to serve the lowest achieving students. So some examples of things that they could put in place is preparing low achieving students for gifted and talented or higher level courses. So you may have systems in place to prepare those students to get them ready to take those courses. Of course, you'd have to do some identification of those kids. So professional learning for how to identify those kids, or any kid actually, for gifted and talented services. Professional learning for teachers and other staff across the district would be allowable. And that's not just on identifying those kids, but also how to provide services to those kids, because those kids are going to be in the regular classroom as well. So ideas on how to differentiate to ensure that gifted and talented kids are effectively served would be allowable. Also, you could use funds to implement a system or services to help identify students. So particularly those students that are at risk of failing. Just keep in mind that generally funds cannot be used to put in place services for kids that are already high achieving and in the gifted courses. Now those kids can benefit from school-wide or targeted assistance services, but to put a program in place for those children already identifying and participating to provide them additional services is not necessarily an allowable activity.
Thank you, David. That was good clarification on that, and good explanation. We do have a few questions in the chat if you all want to check those, and another one has come in through email as well. Let's do the ones from the chat first, if that's okay.
Okay. So the first question I responded to in the chat, 5, 6, and 7, is if we are using Title I funds to do so, that's when they are applicable. Yes, when you're coordinating Title I with those other programs or using funds for those programs, that's when these questions are applicable.
Yes. So if you're not planning on using Title I funds to address those questions, you would just leave those narratives blank. You would not have to complete them if you're not allocating Title I funds for those areas.
Yeah. So that's the second question. If a district does
Yes.
not use Title I funds to address 5 to 7 or in coordinating with Title I, you do not have to complete these sections, and that is correct.
Mhm.
So if a school decides to spend some of their allocation on library books or similar, do we need to complete number 7? It's a school decision, not a district decision. And I think you go back to the question or the statement in number 7, which we pulled directly from the statute. And it really is about how the district is supporting schools in implementing those library and gifted and talented students. So it's about district support, not necessarily how the school is planning to use its funds, but it's about how districts are really getting schools on the right track and providing some assistance in improving those services or skills. The next one, are these added questions if using funds only at the district level? I think we've answered that, but yes, they are really about the district's processes and services.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe if Tara could go back to slide 6 so that we could see.
And I think they're talking about actually slide number 6, maybe.
Oh, okay. Yes, slide 6.
So is that one about middle school, high school? Yes, well, maybe it's the next one. Let's see the next one. Yeah, so this particular one is really about middle school, high school students.
Okay, I did say preschool too. That's my
Yeah, so
mistake to
if you
kindergarten.
look at the preschool slide that we added,
That will
there
cover
is
that.
a piece about transition in that particular question. I think that's all we have in the chat.
All right. We have a couple of questions here that have come in through email. The first one is, will the GMAP application coincide with the CSIP due dates so that these align? And the answer to that is no. The CSIP due date is in statute, so that's that's fixed. And the GMAP application we know is going to be here sometime in the near future. But we do have some changes to the GMAP application that will kind of perhaps address what you're asking. And I think that's our next slide, isn't it, Brenda?
It is.
Okay, so yeah, so hopefully our next slide will help with that question. But if not, let us know and we can further address that. The other question that came in that says, so it sounds like these items are allowable from a district level and can be put in place from the district level. The LEA would not allocate funds to each school to enhance libraries, but could do a district allocation and enhance libraries across the entire district from one district code or allocation amount. I mean, we can, if we don't have an answer for this one right now, if this is something we need to think about, we can always follow up.
Yes.
Yeah, let's follow up on that.
Let's follow up on that one. I think we need to have a conversation about that one.
Right.
Yeah, that's a little more involved, so I agree with that. Okay. All right, are we ready for the next slide? But thanks for the great questions. These are very good.
Good questions.
Absolutely. Appreciate the good participation too. Are we ready for the next slide?
Yes, let's go to the next one.
All right.
So the last change that you will see that will be different for you for FY22 and GMAP is on the school personnel and program description section. In the past, for each school that was going to be receiving Title I funds, you had to include a narrative, and there were some requirements of what needed to be within that narrative. From this point on, in the program description box, it will only say for targeted assistance schools only. It will not be for every school that will be receiving school-wide funds. For the targeted assistance schools, they will have to describe in their narrative how they're going to identify those students that are most in need for the target assistance services. So no other school descriptions will be included in this section and in that text box. So we realize that the information that you are including within that program description box for schools that are school-wide programs is also included in their CSIPs. So therefore, that information is being captured already in a CSIP and is not necessary to be added within the GMAP application. And I think we're going to get some good feedback on that, Tara.
I know that's a positive right there.
That is a positive.
Yeah, just anytime you can streamline things, it's always a good thing. So that's
Right.
what has occurred here. So just some streamlining.
Sarah, can I say a
Go
couple
ahead.
things?
Sure.
The page is going to look very familiar to you, and the layout's pretty much going to be the same, but please make sure you're paying attention to that box and know that you do not have to collect those school-wide descriptions at this point. The only thing leaving in there is that piece about targeted assistance schools. We don't collect that particular information anywhere else, and that affects really about 8 to 10 schools across the state. So for most people, that particular section should be blank.
Yes.
Tara, I also want to talk a little bit about the comment about the CSIP date. There's a reason we don't align those dates, and really due to regulation, a district cannot access its funds for any federal program unless A, July 1st rolls around and that district has an approved application, or B, if July rolls around and the application isn't approved, once the application is approved, that is the point that folks can begin to access funds. So we don't necessarily want to align the dates with the January 1st improvement plan dates, because that means that if we did that, there's a potential that people are going to be waiting for a very long time halfway through the year to be able to access their funds, or it's just kind of the misalignment of the date is there for a reason. I guess we don't want to hold people up from getting those particular funds. The second piece of that, there's an initial due date, generally early in the summer, late in the spring, early in the summer, based on tentative allocations. We want you to be planning ahead of time in order to get that application approved as quickly as possible. But then, as probably everybody knows, there's an October release of final allocations, and we do require some revisions at that point. So we do understand that there's some frustration with the alignment of the dates, but really we put these dates out there for the application for the benefit of people so they can start accessing their funds early on as needed.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Is there anything else that is in the chat that we need to talk about before we move on?
I'm not seeing anything else that's that would be a question oriented.
Yeah, just lots of positive comments.
Lots of positives. Yeah.
Good. That's good. Yeah, glad to be able to deliver a positive. So we did have one additional question that's come in just now, and it says, how long will districts have to submit the GMAP application once it becomes available? I know I know we usually, do they not usually have?
Usually we give them 4 to 6 weeks, maybe even 8 weeks sometimes. So there will be plenty of time to get that filled in and submitted.
All right. So let's move on to a new topic. But of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please be sure to submit those in the chat or through the email, and we'll try to get those answered during the call if possible, and if not, we'll follow up. But for now, we'll move on to our CARES Act. David, we had on the agenda that there was an equitable services update, and I'm not sure if that was just an leftover from a previous. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, Not too much right now. Really, at this point, districts ought to be focusing on sending out invitation letters and starting to identify private schools that want to participate. And then, from there, they can start to set up consultation with those private schools. The other thing I might want to make districts aware of is we are going to be implementing a couple rounds of emergency funding for some private schools who have applied under the second round of GEAR funding, and then under the American Rescue Plan. The state is providing services under those emergency plans. So just keep that in mind through the consultation process, that they are going to be receiving lots of things and services from the state. And that might help to drive some conversations about what actual needs are through Title I and other federal programs. I think in this first round, we're going to be serving about 135 private schools. So many homeschools chose not to access the funds, and many of our private schools not associated with the diocese or another private school association within the state may not have applied. But if they did, they're getting a pretty sizable chunk of money. And I think that could toughen the conversations a little bit on the private school services front at the district level, because at this point some of them may have more money and services than they know what to do with at this point.
Well, it's another example of being able to coordinate funds and so on. So that's a good thing to be aware of.
Yeah, in both of these rounds of emergency funding, the second one we won't get in until probably mid or late summer. But I believe the first one was around $40 million to serve approximately 135 schools. The second one is going to be about the same amount of money. And we have one more question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
For the consultation with other federal programs question, are we required to consult with every one of those programs and document that in this question? And Tara, I'm thinking back to our US Ed monitoring, and I want to say yes, because US Ed really harped on the consultation and collaboration with early childhood programs. But do you have any comment about that?
That may be one that we may want to have some further discussion on as well, and get a really detailed, thorough response, and we could put that one with the other question.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay. We do have a real good question that I think will be very good clarification. Some folks might need to hear this one again. David just referenced sending invitations to private schools for CARES. I thought KDE is handling this for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds. Did I misunderstand? David?
Sorry, I'm talking to myself. Thought I had hit the mute button, but I didn't. Yeah, what I was talking about was really sending your Title I invitations. We are handling the outreach and services for the second and third round of emergency funding.
Yes. Okay, so that's a very important point to clarify. So that was a good one. Okay. So let's move on and talk now about the monitoring. Since we're talking about CARES and ESSER funds, we've tried to kind of keep you updated as we've been working on the pilot that we started talking about a few months ago. So I'll just give you a brief update and then an update on that topic. Again, we selected 3 districts for monitoring as part of a pilot for the CARES, and that's the ESSER 1 funds. And we selected those districts based on a risk assessment, just like we do for our other programs. We have reviewed documentation and conducted an interview with each of the districts. This was all laid out in the monitoring form that you received a couple of months ago. And we have sent one of the completed monitoring reports back to the district, and we're still working on the other two. We're also requesting feedback from the districts the 3 pilot districts, so we can use that feedback to improve the process for the summer monitoring of these same ESSER 1 funds. We're in the early planning stages for the summer monitoring. Districts will again be selected for the summer monitoring based on a risk assessment. We anticipate notifying those districts in May. One important update to note is that the monitoring form you received did not have time and effort as a requirement on there. So we're going to be adding time and effort to the monitoring form. And since we are going to be adding that, I thought we would have a short review on time and effort. We will be providing more updates and new information for you on time and effort at our next webinar, so be sure to tune into that. But for now, we'll just do a brief review of time and effort. Also, at the next monitoring, the next month's webinar, we'll be sure to send you an updated CARES Act form with the time and effort added in. So, the 2 Code of Federal Regulations we're going to be looking at on this slide are the 200.403 and 200.430. And it says first that the person's salary who's being paid, whether in full or in part, has to be allocable or chargeable or assignable to Title I. And the second one, second Code of Federal Regulations, talks about the documentation that has to be maintained. And the documentation has to accurately reflect the work that's being done. Okay, those are 2 very important guiding principles behind time and effort. So which employees does this documentation have to be maintained for? And just to reinforce what I talked about before, whether it's Title I or Title II or Title III, or CARES Act funds, this would still apply because this is Code of Federal Regulations, which goes for all of them. So the time and effort documentation has to be maintained for all employees whose salaries are paid in whole or in part with federal funds. It's required for employees, but not for contractors. Okay, if a cost like a person's salary benefits 2 or more projects or activities in proportions that can be determined without undue effort or cost, the cost should be allocated to the projects based on proportional benefit. So we're looking at the percentage of Title I funds that would be used and the percentage of other funds in that one. And if proportions cannot be determined, the costs may be allocated or transferred to benefited projects on any reasonable documented basis. So there could be a situation where an organization couldn't determine the proportion that the person's work was benefiting the project they were working on. And in those cases, the costs could be distributed to the benefited projects on any reasonable documented basis. We'll have some more information on this next webinar. And then the last thing I wanted to just review with you is that other Code of Federal Regulations that was on the first slide, which had to do with documentation. And so let's take a look at the standards for documentation of time and effort. Basically, this slide talks about the documentation and criteria for the documentation. First, it's very important to have a system of internal control that can provide reasonable assurance that charges are accurate, allowable, and properly allocated. The documentation has to be part of the official records of the non-federal entity. The documentation has to reasonably reflect the total activity for which the person is compensated, and it cannot go over 100%, so 100% of their time. And it needs to comply with your district's established accounting policies and practices. So those are some basic requirements. It has to be assignable to specific activities or cost objectives. Next month, we're going to talk more about the documentation that we will want to see during monitoring, whether that is CARES Act funds monitoring or Title I. We'll send you an updated monitoring tool, as I mentioned, for the CARES Act. For monitoring, showing the addition of time and effort, and we will also talk and much more detail about the internal controls around time and effort. So be sure to tune into that next month, or else watch the recording if you can't make the live meeting. Again, our next meeting will be on May 27th, 10 to 11 a.m., and you can catch any of the previously recorded webinars on our webpage. David and Brenda, have any more questions come in, or do you have any parting thoughts to share?
There's one more question that I think I missed, and it is, could you share some appropriate services for other than student tutoring for our private schools? They really struggle to use their funds. So I will say this, I've been monitoring this week, and that's kind of been a point of discussion. So as you know, in GMAP, when you are putting in your data for private schools, it's going to create two pots of money for you. One is a parent-family engagement pot, which is generally pretty small. And then there's, I'll just call it the services pot. That's usually a much bigger chunk of funding. So I'll focus on that services pot. And before I do, I just want to say that parent and family engagement pot is really just the bottom dollar that has to be spent on parent and family engagement activities. So under Title I, the services pot is pretty flexible. So you could use that services pot for direct student services such as tutoring. You could use it to provide professional development for the private school staff with those identified Title I students in their classrooms, or for the person that is providing direct student services. And you could provide additional parent and family engagement out of that pot. So in your discussion, you can say, hey, this pot is flexible. We can use this pot for three things. Or if a private school says, hey, we've got this large direct services pot, but we really want to focus on additional parent and family engagement activities, and really that's all we want to do, you could certainly do that with that extra services pot. Okay, so they can, in your consultation discussions, you can talk about allocating that larger pot for those three types of services. In what chunk you want to go where. As a last resort, if they generate funds, but there's really not a need in any one of those three categories, direct services, professional development, or additional parent and family engagement, you could do some coordinated services for those kids that are identified as lowest achieving. So you still have to identify, no matter what, which students are lowest achieving, and then provide those coordinated services. For example, mental health services would be an allowable activity under equitable services. And we heard, we're on the ground in Boone County, and we heard that is particularly a high need there for their private school students. So that is an activity that could be provided if that, is determined to be a great need where the other activities are not. So Jennifer, I hope that kind of gives you some basis to go with.
All right, I do not see any further questions that have come in. Brenda, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I don't. I could also, David, do you want me to copy and paste from the non-regulatory guidance some examples of services?
I think what we could do is let's add that to our discussion list and
Yes.
put it in our FAQs when we send it.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Title I coordinators, for joining us this morning. Look forward to seeing you next month, and I hope you have a great day and rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.